Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Our chair, Bonnie Franson, will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, I'm the acting chair, Jeff Manson, for the Planning Board. I'd like to welcome everybody to our Planning Board meeting for July 23rd, 2022. Oh, sorry. June 23rd, 2022. June, July. Before we get started, just like to point out our emergency exits. There's an emergency exit on this side of the room. There's the door that we all came through. Once you come through the door, you can either exit out to the front of the building, or off to the left, there's a door out to the porch. If I can ask everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. The flag is located behind the monitors. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda. Oh.
You skipped it. Nick Napoli.
Here.
Jeff Manson.
Here.
Pat Shea.
Here.
Steve Thor.
Here.
And Bonnie Franson will be joining us shortly. Thank you.
The first application on our agenda is DG Management. We are in receipt of a letter from DG asking that their appearance tonight be postponed. So I'm just going to read from that. On behalf of DG Management, I am writing to remove the DG Management matter from the June 22nd, 2022 agenda to allow for further submissions by the applicant. Please have the Planning Board announce at the meeting that the adjourned date in July, at the meeting, the adjourned date in July, so the public hearing does not have to be renoticed. Further, the applicant waives the 120-day deadline for the closure of public hearing that is required by Town Law 276 5D2. And such waiver can be placed in the record. We are expecting to have our submissions in by the deadline for the July meeting. Thank you for the courtesies. Jay Monroe from Lucine Shapiro, Frank, and Monroe represent. That meeting will now, that application will now take place on July 19th, 2022, and that will be a continuation of the public hearing.
If you could do a motion to adjourn the public hearing to July 19th at 6 p.m. and to also consent that the 100-day period under town law be extended.
So I'll make that motion. May I have a second?
Is that good?
Yeah. Yes. All right, so Nick seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Who's next?
It is BG Fuel Station, BJ's.
Ah,
So we need to wait for Bonnie to arrive.
We can't go until Bonnie gets here.
Yeah,
correct.
she'll be here any minute. Jeff talks fast.
we will stand and briefly say. Our next application, but just so I can give you a clue to our audience, so our next application is for a gas station for BJ's Wholesale and a adjacent fast food restaurant. I am an employee of BJ's Wholesale Club, and so I've recused myself from this application. We are, at the moment, a 7-person board, so we must have 4 people to operate. As soon as Bonnie gets here, I'll be able to step down, and she will take over, and we will commence with that application. Thank you for your patience.
Yes.
Okay, just let me get you up here.
All right, so next item on the agenda is BJ site plan, Karen Business Park, Larkin Drive in Monroe, New York. If the applicant would come forward.
Good evening, how are you?
Okay.
You just want to stand here?
There's the podium right there, sir.
I don't know where George is. I just tried to reach out to him, so I'm not sure where he is. I'm Pat Smith, on behalf of the management of the owner of Hadley Business Park. So we resubmitted our plans. We received comments back from the engineer. We're going to be able to comply with all of those comments. There was I think, is there an arrangement for Zoom with the traffic engineer?
Yes, I just forwarded you the link.
Just now? Okay.
Okay, so that's really the only new information we're going to be presenting. So it's just a follow-up on the traffic engineers, the latest letter we got from the KRF, the town's traffic engineer.
And was that 2 people you had joining on Zoom?
Yeah, it was really Ken and
Zachary.
Ken Worsted, and I think Sam was going to be joining.
I think Sam joined it, exactly.
Yeah, Ken's really most, we're gonna have Stan Tech available if there's any questions. They're not gonna be presenting anything tonight. But I did want Ken to respond to the latest AKRF.
And I don't believe we had an AKRF person, or we did have an AKRF person?
We do not.
We did not, okay, that's what I thought. All right, so here's our Zoom. Good evening, can you all hear me? Okay. So I'm hearing this through my speaker. I don't know that anyone else can hear, right? In the absence of having a speaker
No.
next to it.
No one said anything about doing
I didn't even think of it,
a
George,
Zoom.
sorry.
Okay, so just be aware, those of us, Ashley and I can hear your responses, but otherwise there's not a speaker to project you. Don't know. In fact, this is going to be, so we can try it. Okay. Let me turn on my speaker volume. Okay. I'm gonna mute so we don't get feedback.
Yeah, just shut it.
You did? Okay, I went on that. All right, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, so Ken, if you can just walk us through the latest AKRF letter and just talk to the issues that were raised and how they've been resolved.
I'm not sure.
Can you hear me, Dave?
So okay, so the applicant asked if you could go through the comments and what your responses are to date with regard to AKRF's review.
Did we lose him?
Can you-
Excuse me, Bonnie. Hold him up a minute.
Ken, hold on a second, sorry.
We don't have it on the big screen anymore, on the 2 screens.
Ashley,
Did
are
that?
you recording this?
Okay, there they are. Because there's speakers in these monitors, so,
They should be projecting.
yeah.
Okay, let's see what happens. All right, Ken, why don't you continue and let's see if the speakers work.
Is he coming out of yours? Take him out of yours and it'll probably come out of these.
understand the problem. That queues could depend longer than that. And so what we're looking at is really a very low potential for it to queue out. Now, if it was free donut day or something to that effect, obviously you're going to have a lot more traffic there. And again, we don't know what the tenant is going to be, but in those circumstances, you have that potential that queues could be longer than that, but that's not going to be the norm. We compared it to the other fast food restaurants along that plaza. And the Taco Bell, the Wendy's, those all have a comparable queue length as what we're offering. And we looked at even some other sites around town. So what we're providing or offering here is consistent with all the other land uses of that type in this area. The queuing for the gas station facility, there isn't a lot of research on that because gas stations tend to not queue up as much. You can typically arrive to them in any particular direction, drive up from the left or the right, depending on what side your tank is on, etc. So we looked at how much the average fill-up would take, and looked at how many fueling positions they have, and also looked at how much traffic we were expecting to generate. So if the average fueling time takes 2 minutes per vehicle, and mind you that there's no chance to walk over to the attendant and buy some food or drinks or use the bathroom. So you're really just there to fuel up the lead. At 2 minutes, we could process 360 vehicles an hour through the pumps that they have or would provide. And that's 4 times the amount of traffic that we would expect to have at the facility. So in that respect, queuing is going to be minimal. You should always pretty much pull up to there and find a spot to pull into.
Ken, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so real life observations. I've been up to the Newburgh facility with the gas prices the way they've been, and BJ is offering a discount on those prices. I can tell you that there's been significant queuing, and there's been backing up into some of the drive lanes.
And
I know that's not necessarily the norm, but it is a reality.
yes, and given the configuration of the Newburgh site, you can expect some of that, but it's not expected to queue up through 17K and be, not be able to get into the store, et cetera. So it is contained on site, and yes, it is, given the gas prices, it's a bit unique in the circumstances that we're under, but I take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks.
or if the signal were to adjust itself automatically, it would run better than what we had analyzed in our kind of static situation. They have noted a couple other comments about peak hour factors and trip percentages. We can provide them backup for that. But ultimately, we feel that overall, we've addressed the comments. We don't see that there's a significant impact on this project. And I know one of the ultimate conclusions that we're trying to get to, both as the applicant and the board, is there a significant impact on the project? Does the project require an EIS? And I think the answer to those is no. I think we looked at the traffic enough to be able to come to that conclusion. I know that AKRS traffic consultant on vacation, so he wasn't able to attend tonight, but I would hope that we can draw their attention to the fact that there's going to be some site plan comments that need to be addressed, but ultimately, in their purview of the grand scheme of where are we with seeker, that we address those big issues. There are no off-site significant traffic impacts, and the answer to whether an EIS is needed is no. What I plan to do is take some of the comments, and obviously they sent over an email last night, take those and incorporate it into a revised response that we can get back to ACARE and the board, such that they can have a finalized review letter.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
George, since you've arrived and we've started to touch upon seeker, real quick, did we get any kind of consistency memo with the original findings or approvals to date?
You don't yet have a memo, but I have gone through it. We lost an associate to DC, so she was working on that. So we didn't have a chance, I didn't have a chance to complete it with her. But I went through it last week. We are consistent with the findings that have been made both in 1991 and 1999. There have been several consistency determinations since then. So what I can do is, between now and the next meeting, I'll work with Ashley and Sean to put it into a comprehensible form, because to get 20 years and 30 years into 2 pages is
It might actually be useful to have a timeline as part of it, just as an attachment, where we can have dates and when those consistent.
and that's how I'm trying to structure it.
Yeah, I think so. Then next time this happens, right? Because we continuously have changes, within the business park, we already have that all set up to facilitate the process. So,
Like the average. Project team is simple.
now that you're all here, did you want to offer any kind of presentation as far as whether there have been any revisions to the site plan prior to us asking our consultants with regard to the comments they have on the plans?
It's a very small change. I believe last time we had discussed about relocating the trash enclosure, which Sean had brought up. We did move it out so that we moved that relief section, and then other change we made was we split out the lot coverage table between County Monroe and Woodbury, which was requested. So that's those are the 2 changes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, Sean, did you have comments?
Sure, I'll just touch on some of the bigger, basically outside agency questions, but Sharad brought up the lot coverage calculation. Last time the board had asked that we referred to Ben to make sure that the lot coverage, basically the determination that the applicant made was consistent with what Ben could determine. So Ben did get back to me today and said that he agreed that the lot coverage could be handled over the all the parcels of the business park, as opposed to just the lot that the gas station's proposed on, and determined that the small increase in coverage would not require variance.
Okay.
With regards to the O&R easement, we did ask for basically an acceptance from O&R for the proposed improvement within the easement. So we'll be looking for that, as well as a sign off from DPW Orange County DPW and DEC on the proposed sewer main improvements. And you had previously sent over the Village of Harriman acceptance for the water connections. So we do have that for the file. With regards to the SWIP, our office basically signed off on the SWIP with the exception of 2 minor comments, making sure that the bioretention planting schedule was included on the plan set, and the MS4 acceptance and NOI be included in the SWIP, which really just said.
I think I sent you the draft
Right.
in March, but if you have any comments, let me know. And
Sure.
we'll fix it.
Okay, great.
Sean, just to go back to the comment about the O&R.
Right.
There actually is no easement with O&R right now, there's no easement, it's just the lines are there.
Right.
Nothing was ever recorded, so we're actually creating that easement right now, that's what's taking over the time.
Yep.
But they've agreed that the plan is okay, subject to their, trees, you can't put trees under the wires and things like that. But I'll get you that, the letter from them, in the next day or so, and the actual easement, when it's finalized, we'll submit that.
Great. Okay. Good.
Yeah, when you say finalized, if you could have the draft.
Sure.
So when the draft is put together, so our attorney can review it as well.
Yeah, they're running with that, so I have no control over how fast that's going to come out. But I did get the letter from them yesterday saying that it was okay, so now we can go ahead and draft it.
Okay, thank you. Ashley, do you have any comments?
Sure. Just jumping back to the lot coverage issue, for a minute here, I know I spoke to George about this past week, so there's just an inconsistency between the 2.74 acre portion that's not to be included per, you mentioned a prior declaration, but that amount should actually be 2.5 acres. So I think on the plan it's noted as 2.74, and the record indicates it's 2.5, so if you could just make sure that that's consistent. It won't change the percentages, it'll still be in compliance, but it should just be shown correctly on the plan. I did see, I think it was yesterday or today, some comments as far as the tree plan goes. So it would be helpful, and this board prefers to have one plan sheet that's actually called a tree plan, that has all of that data on it, that lists the trees, identifies them by type. You could have a table and showing the total. Just, I understand you have certain notes about tree protection on different sheets, but to jump around, it's just easier. The board requires it to be on its separate tree plan. So I could get through some more specific comments on that, but I could just share those with you the more technical later. And 2 more items. The applicant has requested a 20.4% parking reduction, so that's something the board will have to consider. In order to grant that, there needs to be a parking needs study for the proposed uses in the business park to show that, to demonstrate that the combination of uses will generate needs that don't overlap. So I think at some point there was something that was submitted, I just don't know that we received from the planning board's traffic engineer specific on the parking study. So I just wanted to highlight that. And
Actually, we did submit we did actual parking counts the week before Christmas, and we
yeah, I recall there being, I just don't recall ever seeing something from our traffic consultant.
There is a comment, but I don't think there is a conclusion.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think I think what they were saying is it's a board decision.
Correct.
So it's not, they're not arguing with the traffic counts, it's just that they don't make the decision on whether it's whether it's granted or not, it's a board decision.
That's correct. That is correct.
Has your parking calculation, I know in fast food you made some changes and there might have been a reduction in the parking for that location. Does the parking demand analysis take into account any of the modifications?
I believe we lost one space, but I think the reduction, the numbers are not going to materially change in any aspect of 543 some parking spaces. So that's already factored into the revised plan.
But you're also losing the additional spaces on the.
That exists now?
Yeah, they were factored in anywhere. They were factored in anywhere.
You're just referring to an adjustable space.
One space because of the trash enclosure relocation, there was a loss of 3 more space. But what I was trying to get at is that on a grand scheme, it's not even a percentage point difference. It's a very insignificant number that's going to favor us like
Right, but did the parking study include the, I don't know if the parking study.
Yeah, the
included
parking
loss.
study included the removal of the 68 satellite parking spaces. That study was done. I believe it was sent over to AKRF. AKRF had made a comment, which is consistent with Pat, that just mentioned that they acknowledge it, but they can't be the entity that approves it. It should be the board.
So that you're referring to the satellite parking, but you're also proposing to remove, I forget the number, in the corner
Yes,
near the access drive. Did the parking study include the loss of
I
space?
believe so. I think Ken's forum did it. I'm not sure if Ken can hear this or not, but that's my understanding.
And just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that the consultant would be the one to actually give the waiver, obviously that's for the board, but the board would want their input on the analysis that was conducted in that study to say that they agree with the methodology.
We would note that the waiver would be consistent with the recommendation of the observation in the comprehensive plan, that there is a substantial amount of excess parking here. I agree with you.
Ken, I don't know if you can hear me, do you want to weigh in on the parking study that was done with regard to the request to reduce the required number of parking spaces? Was that done by your office? You're muted.
We have looked at the overall, we have looked at basically the 68 space parking lot that's kind of satellite to BJ's. And we looked at the entire BJ's club site, you know, tire center, front, back, employee areas. And generally found that if you were to lose the 68 spaces that are in the satellite area, it changes the percentage on the BJ site from like 24 to 29% occupied. So there's still ample room beyond that to accommodate the loss of those spaces. But also, if there's any, let's say, overflow space needed for the restaurant or for the gas station, for example, an employee to park on the club side, but work, you know, in the kiosk at the gas station, there's plenty of room for that. Similar to the fast food restaurant, if the 5, 6, 7 employees at the fast food were to park on the near side of the wholesale club parking lot, they have, you know, plenty of room there to do that without hindering the wholesale club's ability to park and get customers in.
Thank you. With that, do board members, do you have any comments or questions at this point in time with regard to the proposed project? Any comments?
I don't.
No? Okay. I don't have any comments at this time either. Ashley, does it make sense for us to go through the part 3 right now, or should we work on that and address it at the next meeting?
That's really up to you if you want to wait until you have that consistency from the applicant.
Yeah, so I would just, in the interest of time, and we have a big audience here for another application, I think it'd be useful for us to work on the part 3 between now and the next meeting. Maybe draft something up for review by the planning board, see what pieces we have that can constitute in the AF part 3. And then, did we determine whether or not a public hearing is required and whether we wanted to hold a public hearing at this point?
It's not required, but I don't know that you.
We haven't made a determination. Okay.
Could I ask
Yes.
one thing? You talked about the part 3. The part 2 is the one that lives in the.
Sorry, part 2. Right.
Can we just run through that briefly to see if anything rings a bell or numbers so that we can focus on that, make sure we do have it?
I could bring it up. We're not going to fill it out right now.
Well, just
but we'll scan
literally
through it.
read the questions
Yeah,
and
we
see if
can
anybody.
scan through it quickly. I just don't want to take up a lot of time.
Oh, I agree.
You, Ashley, you sent the part 2 earlier? I think?
Yes, that is number 1.
All right, and it's the short EAF. So here's part 2, the impact assessment. Will the proposed action create a material conflict with an adopted land use plan or zoning regulations? So I would suggest that as we go through this, if the board members, if anyone feels that something's moderate to large, to speak out. Otherwise, if you think it's small to minimal, then we'll just continue on. Proposed action, change in the use or intensity of land. From my perspective, I think there is a change in the use or intensity of land, but I don't know that it's considered moderate necessarily. Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of the existing community? Is an existing commercial area, this would be additional commercial development in that area. Will the proposed action have an impact on environmental characteristics that cause the establishment of a CEA? This isn't, I believe, in the CEA area. Will the proposed action result in an adverse change in the existing level of traffic or affect the existing infrastructure for mass transit, biking, or walkway? From my perspective, I think that's moderate to large, and I think that's the purpose of going through all these analyses, which will then explain as part of the part 3. Will the proposed action cause an increase in the use of energy and it fails to incorporate reasonable available energy conservation or renewable energy opportunities? I don't know if we really talked about energy or conservation of energy, solar panels or anything of that nature, but just probably something to provide us in a memo in terms of whether there's any sustainable elements in there or if you're just otherwise needing energy for New York State energy for the buildings. Will the proposed action impact existing public-private water supplies, public-private wastewater treatment utilities? I would just suggest that we have to have a narrative with regard to groundwater, Harriman wells, etc. Make sure we cover that. Will the proposed action impair the character, quality of important historic, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resources? Again, already commercially developed area. There are no historic, archaeological artifacts there. Will the proposed action result in an adverse change to natural resources, wetlands, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora, and fauna? I would say, it's already a developed site. Some removal of vegetation, so we'll address that in general as part of landscaping. Will the proposed action result in an increase in the potential for erosion, flooding, or drainage problems? That's why we have SWIP being prepared and response for that. And will the proposed action create a hazard to environmental resources or human health? Again, I think we just need a narrative with regard to the fact that we're introducing fuel storage tanks and what are the containment methods and what is there as far as the safeguards to ensure it doesn't enter into groundwater resources. Anybody have any other thoughts with regard to environmental assessment form? Actually, anybody? No.
There was a comment by the town of Woodbury, I believe it was, regarding the aquifer.
Okay.
If that could be addressed as well.
We expect a letter from the town. We did have a meeting with them and the Stantec environmental people. And they were concerned about Woodbury's access, which is not connected to them.
Okay. All right. So that's a quick overview. Yeah, and I don't think that there's anything from our review that suggests that an environmental impact statement for the project, but I think we just need something in part 3 that summarizes all the data that have been presented to date. Anything else we need to address at this point?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next.
Hopefully down at 4.
Hopefully with air conditioning. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to turn off the Zoom now. All right. Member Manson, come up and join us. Just for the audience's benefit, what we were going through was BJ's over in Harriman is proposing a fuel station there. You've been up to Newburgh, it's a comparable facility, as well as another fast food pad for potential tenant there. So that's what we were going over. Next item on the agenda is Mountain View Shul, Mountain View Avenue, Monroe, New York. Good evening. So if you could give us an overview of where we are in the process?
Sure. Good evening, John Queen from Lincoln Tully, engineer for the applicant. We were last before you in April. We presented a sketch plan for the new community shul at 277 Mountain View Drive. Since that time, we've updated the plan set to include a lot more detail than we initially had on the sketch. We've updated the survey to reflect the current conditions with the existing shul that was constructed there. We've been running through Sean's comments as well at that time. We're back with you with basically an updated plan that addressed the comments that we had. We did present to you the narrative with the request of the waivers associated with the project. We also provided floor plans of the general building that was requested, and we did the FAR calculations, which are now included on sheet 1 of the plan set. We did those 2 ways, one with the existing shul included, and one we didn't count the existing shul because that's going to be converted to the shed.
Okay.
So where we kind of last left off was the board was going to circulate for the agency once I updated the documents. I believe that was done recently. And I think based on getting the updated survey, the board was thinking of potentially doing a site plan.
So, real quick, with regard to the lead agency circulation that has occurred,
Yes,
Um,
June 15th.
June 15th, so we still have our 30 days. With that, let's go into Sean's comments at this point.
Sure.
Up on the board.
So John, you said that the floor area ratio calculation was on the cover sheet of the site plan or of the
Site plan.
site plan? Okay.
Yeah.
I missed it because that was one of my comments, but.
Yeah, it's right. I have it right under the parking requirement.
Okay.
No problem.
So the proposed shul is going to be 3 stories, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And one sheet calls it out as 1 story,
Yeah.
so that'll have to be addressed. However, the height is regulated up to 2.5 stories, so there is a calculation that can be done for the height, so that'll have to be worked out.
Yes, we'll work that out. We're calling it 3 because it's a walk.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll
Okay.
work that out.
So typically for or what's been done in the past for the request to reduce the screen as part of the special use permit requirements, the board typically asks for pictures from the site looking in different directions to make sure that the existing screen is sufficient, since that's what you're claiming, that, for the need for the waiver on that screen part of the special use permit criteria. It looks like the parking was a little bit insufficient based on the use, or your parking calculation identified 37 spaces needed and there was only 35 provided.
Yeah, the 2 are with the house, with the driveway.
Oh,
So they have 35 around the shul and then they took credit for the driveway.
Okay.
So I'll call it.
And then the refuse area, the dumpster enclosure, looked like it was right up against the lot line, so that'll have to meet the side yard setback.
Okay, we can relocate.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of room for that. And then moving to water, I believe you're looking to get a connection to the Village of Curious Joel's water source?
We already have connections, so we requested a letter from the village indicating that they will serve the proposed use.
Okay, so if you could just note where the connections are. And then with regards to sewer, you have the existing septic system, one of the existing septic systems shown.
Yes,
Is that serving both existing buildings?
yes.
Okay, so that will be
That will be, yep, that will be abandoned.
abandoned?
And
Okay,
the sewer main will be extended up Mountain View Drive to service the property.
right, so that extension should be included as well as, Orange County DPW and DEC will have to sign off on that extension.
Right.
I would suggest if you're going to abandon the system, that the septic tank at a minimum be pulled. Last time the board had discussed the pedestrian trail to Carlsberg Road in the rear.
Yes.
Whether or not that would require the sidewalk, sidewalks provided as well as, ADA access. Would ADA access be necessary to?
Yeah, currently right now it's a gravel path that connects back to the village. I don't necessarily think it would have to be ADA accessible, it's not the main route to the facility. But certainly the board's feeling is that they should pave it or make it more stable.
What is the main route to is it mostly people driving, or I know a lot of people walk, so,
They walk on the Sabbath.
okay. And are they mostly coming from the north?
They're coming from the neighborhood, Mountain View, Irene,
Okay,
as well as, yes, the village.
okay. So I think we should give that some consideration, but we could take a look at that on the sidewalk.
Agreed, yeah, in my opinion, I think, at a minimum to the property line, a accessible walkway be provided. That's basically all I have, other than, it will require GML 239 referral, and lead agency was just circulating.
Thank you. Ashley, do you have comments?
Yes, the parking table on sheet 1, it includes the residential requirements, should include the residential requirements as it does on sheet 3, there's just an inconsistency there. And then the bulk table on sheet 3 indicates the waiver sought from special use permit criteria 1, 2, 3, and 7, but it's actually 1, 2, 4, and 7. So it's correct on sheet 1, but it's not on sheet 3.
Good catch.
Again, we're still waiting on the well-served letter from the village about the proposed expansion. SHPO, I believe we just received a no impact letter from them. The board will need architectural details, a tree plan and landscaping plan.
What was the last part?
A tree plan and landscaping plan, and Sean had touched on the visual analysis as part of the screening rules for any of the existing landscaping we are relying on to satisfy the special use permit criteria. And it will require a public hearing for this special use permit.
As far as my comments, I would just add we need some kind of landscaping plan and some kind of lighting.
List of work.
Okay, perfect. Board members, do you have any comments? We'll start to the left. Comments? Yeah.
Nothing from me.
Okay. You're good? All right. Actually, at this point in time, procedurally, what can we do? Or is it just we need to get the additional revisions and wait for lead agency coordination to have
Yes.
occurred? Okay.
The 239 to the county.
I would like to hold off until we get the lighting and landscaping, because I know those are typically the items that they would comment on.
That's fine.
So I think as soon as we get some lighting and landscaping, when we do get landscaping, I'd like Caleb to take a look at it, send it to Karen.
Yep.
I think lighting will be,
Yeah.
I don't know that it's something that Sean can take a look at.
Yeah.
Of course, LEDs, we're trying to stay with lower light levels, 3,000 Kelvin, so as you put that together, just keep that in mind. Okay? Exactly. That's why we're trying to keep the Kelvin values low, because it's a softer light.
And more than amber.
And more of an amber, exactly. And also, pole height, not excessive, and downward shielded, dark sky compliant.
Yeah, that's.
I'm sure that's all you can address.
Those words.
Yes.
Is the board interested in scheduling a walk anytime soon?
So I think what we'll do is, Maureen, if you could coordinate that with all of us.
That's really what I wanted.
Yes, thank you. So we'll get on that tomorrow and coordinate something. And then would you like to be present, and would the applicant like to be present?
Yes.
Okay.
If you want me there, I can.
Okay. And then we'll probably want our engineer, Ashley might want to come out. So we'll just coordinate with everyone and see if we can get out there.
No problem.
Great. I am not really away, but I'm on vacation next week.
So am I.
Oh, okay, well, there we go. So it'll be after that. Okay?
All right, well, I'm town hall's closed tomorrow.
Yes.
So I will be sending out an email to Monday.
That's fine. Thank you. Anything else?
No?
You're good? Okay, anything you want to add? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next month.
Yes.
Have a good night.
Good night.
All right. Next item on the agenda is Seven Springs subdivision, Seven Springs Road in Monroe.
We're before you tonight with a new project located at 127 Seven Springs Road. It is an existing 9.5 acre parcel.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Bonnie, are you on board docs?
No, I'm on my computer.
Okay.
Do I need to be on Word Docs?
Well, if you go on board docs, all the documents that John sent are on there.
Yeah, I have them downloaded.
Okay.
But thank you, in case I can't find them.
Sorry.
So we are a 9.5 acre parcel. We're located in the SR10 zoning district. Our proposal is to subdivide the property into 4 single-family residential lots to be serviced by a new cul-de-sac, proposed cul-de-sac road, which is approximately 490 feet in length. Each of the lots would be 4 to 5 bedroom homes, serviced by individual well and sewage disposal systems. This is really the first time the board is seeing this. It's a new application. Our office has conducted some soil testing out there. We have verified the sewage disposal fields are capable of providing lots of sewer service. And this is basically our first submission here. There is a ridgeline overlay on the property that extends quite a ways back. As you can see, the development does not infringe upon that. Coming in, twisting the cul-de-sac up and just circulating 4 lots around. The lots 1 and 2 are a little bit on the smaller side. They're about an acre in size. And lots 3 and 4 in the back are the larger ones, pretty much encompassing several acres of land, totaling to the 9. So they're like 2.5 or 4 acres, so it's going over to that. Yeah, we're before you with the sketch. If you have any comments or concerns, and we'd like to begin our journey.
Okay. So I'll start with our engineer. Sean, if you'd like to go through your comments.
Sure. So with regards to the zoning on the property, it's actually quite odd because there's an OS R3 in the rear. The SR10 is in the front, and the Ridgeline Preservation Overlay District is kind of through the middle. However, I think John noted that all the improvements are located in the SR10. I'll leave the coordination with Ben to Ashley since you reach out to him. With regards to the water and sewer, as John noted, they're well and septic proposed on the lots. I just would like to note that our office would like to review the deep and perk tests for each lot. The proposed cul-de-sac, I've got a couple notes on those. It looks like the width of the roadway meets the minor road requirements per the town's zoning regulations. However, there was no grading proposed on the roadway, so we'll need that in order to confirm that the proposed roadway meets the town requirements for the grading for that proposed roadway. However, it does appear that half the roadway is located on the adjacent lot.
Yeah, I'll get into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's an existing 25-foot right-of-way either on this lot and the adjacent lot that's filed that was for a common access plan between the 2 parcels. So this application is exercising its rights to use that 25-foot right-of-way to build the road. So we will provide you with that language of those easements so you can review that and how that was all set up.
Is there any consideration by the neighbor to develop or to subdivide those?
Not that I'm aware of. My applicant is separate from the neighbor. And he hasn't expressed any knowledge of wanting to develop.
I noted a couple cleanup items in the bulk table with regards to height and lot coverage. It looks like, based on Google, review of the Google Maps, it looks like the whole, or most of the lot is wooded, and the EAF is no longer in Indiana Bathroom property, so I would suspect you would want to include a standard mitigation for that, clearing outside the window for bats. As well as, a tree preservation plan will have to be prepared for the site. It looked like on lots 1 and 2, the smaller lots, that parking was located partially in the front yard. So that would have to be addressed, because that's not permitted.
Yeah, we'll push the lot, that aspect.
And then, so the EAF notes that the total disturbance at this point is 5 acres, so a SWIP will have to be prepared. My concern with that is I didn't see any reserved area for stormwater management on the lots. Okay. I'm just concerned because that could affect the net lot area, so.
Do you have a sense of where it's going to be based on topo?
Probably in the corner of lot 1.
Corner lot 1 here?
Yeah, and it's single family development, so it's mainly the drainage from the road. The lots can be handled individually. Just something similar to what we did on PG.
And then, I noted that it will require 239, since it's, I believe the back of the lot is also contiguous with the town of Monroe boundary. And then, I don't know if the board wanted to consider circulating a seat.
Is it Blue Grove or is it South Monroe? I mean, either way, it's 500.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess they would both be contiguous, right? Town.
Well, there's a small gap, we don't touch the town, but we're close enough, but I think it's the town.
Okay, I'm only thinking because we have that 239, I think, NN requirement, that any notice is supposed to be sent to adjoining communities.
Public hearing notice will have to be sent.
Yes, so we just make sure, is it both? Okay.
Yeah, I noted, I think that it was villages south of the world and the town of Monroe.
Can you navigate us there?
Relatively right,
Here.
and down.
Down?
Nope,
This way?
Nope,
This way?
yes.
You're on Summer Springs?
It's going to go long. Kind of,
Over here? This one?
down. It's this.
Yes, I think this might still be Monroe,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. The dark one that cuts through the.
This is,
That's OR.
Right. But I think that would be in Seth one.
that's, yeah, South Monroe Fire. So, this is not South Monroe. Might as well be Monroe too. So it's this guy here,
Yes.
and then your easement is over this property.
Correct. What's a common share?
Yeah, and the other corner, by the northeast corner, would be palm tree.
Palm tree. Self-oriented. Some stone walls. I think there are.
Yeah, there's a couple, yes, along the northern property line.
Okay. Looks like there might be some here too.
Yeah, there's remnants kind of throughout, but it's consistent on the northern.
Okay. And any wetlands?
None that have come up on the map. mapper, but I think in the back.
Back?
No, so the mapper did identify wetlands. but-
Yeah.
Yeah, and it shows up in the back of, yeah, back.
Yeah, okay.
Behind it.
So
Where,
those will have to be accounted, they were not accounted for in the net lot area, but they'll have to be.
Yeah, if they're on the property.
I remember one of the trails is coming through, I don't know if it's on Seven Springs, but eventually goes over to Scunlook, somewhere around here, but I'm not sure which property.
One of the state, one
Yeah,
of the state trails.
one of, like a long path or whatever.
Okay.
Let's just take a look
Sure.
into that, which one. Okay. Were those your comments, Sean?
They were, yep.
Ashley?
So, for purposes of seeker, it would be an unlisted action. You would need to go to the county and then also the village of South Monroe and the town of Coventry.
Okay.
So as Sean noted, that the rear portion of the property is in the OSR 3 district, so I did check with Ben. As you know, sometimes codes have provisions that says how you treat the land when it's in 2 districts like that. Your code doesn't, but Ben did confirm that it should be treated as the SR 10 as far as the minimum lot size, since all the improvements and development is in that district. We spoke a little bit about the right of way, so if you could get that easement, because I couldn't locate it.
Okay.
I did check I think the book and page number that you noted on the map was for the actual deed, so it refers to the right of way, but it doesn't say the purpose of the right of way or how to locate that agreement.
Okay.
As it's proposed now, you would need area variances for the height and for lot coverage. If you could add a note on the subdivision map, because a portion is in the RPO, the Ridgeline Preservation Overlay, to explain what those restrictions are and that they have to comply with those regulations if any building is to be done in that area. On the title sheet, there's a drawing index. The plan sheets listed don't match the titles on the plans. The subdivision would be classified as a major subdivision because it involves a new road. So although it's less than 5 roads, but so the cluster plan is required for a major subdivision. It could be waived if the subdivision involves less than 5 acres, so you're not able to waive the way everything that. Providing the cluster requirement to show potential cluster option for this. It's 57, 27B.
Yeah, I had 57 open. I'm just looking for subdivision regulations.
They're in A65 at the bottom.
Why is it not showing me 65 here?
Didn't get to click in the zone.
Oh, in the zoning and then?
No.
Oh, I think this should be a separate chapter. Maybe it's at the top? Oh,
Oh, you're in, click on,
oh, look at this.
Can I go back? Go back.
if you click on,
I'm gonna go down to Monroe.
Yeah.
There we go. A. Just checking the definitions. Okay, so 4 lots minor, 5 major.
but it's, what triggers the major here is because they're not
Right.
fronting on an existing street.
Right, not more than 4, not involving any administrative road or the extensions in the municipal facilities. So by virtue of the fact that we have a road, it becomes a major. And then major triggers cluster. Correct?
Yes, and clusters can be waived for, I believe it's 4 acres.
Yeah, I was just going to that section.
That's 5721-7B2.
B2? Involving 5 acres or less. Okay. We have some ridgeline overlay area that could be open space.
What's the rear of the property, basically?
Yeah.
That's why we kind of stopped where we
Yeah. we have a lot of area that could work. Ashley, anything else? All right. Planning board members, start on my left hand.
No, no comment.
Is Jeff?
Nothing to
Okay. Real quick, I do have a question about the further subdivision. You have one else?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, what is the 100% expansion area?
That's for the septic systems.
Okay.
So we're providing 100% in case it fails, that they have an area to replace it.
Okay. Not for an accessory apartment.
No,
So you're on this.
a lot of the codes now are requiring, they used to require 50.
Appendix 75A requires 100%.
Yeah, they're requiring 100%.
So basically, design manual for the subject system requires that 100%.
Thank you.
Any questions? Good. All right. So further subdivided. So I do have that question. What is the limit of our cul-de-sac requirements? And is there is the potential, I guess, for that road to also be used in the future by the neighboring property, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
essentially, we're offering for dedication, so public street.
Okay. Number two then, I think we need to go and speak to the town board whether they would even want to consider accepting dedication.
Sure.
Because if not, then it's a private road. And then I think a private road has a limited number of lots which can come off of it, right?
So I would just suggest that let's have John prepare the grading first to make sure that the proposed road would meet the regulations of a town road before we approach the town board.
I know, I agree. I think the length is 500, so we're below that. And as Sean said, you have to meet the grades to be a public street. And I think the private regulations are 4 lots are allowed in the private, and then you can go up to 6 if 2 have frontage on an existing public street. So I believe this could be a private.
So it could be.
Could be.
Okay.
As shown.
In terms of demolition, the house is not demolished yet. There's a house there now that still remains.
Yes.
Okay. And once we start seeker, it will remain until we're complete.
Yeah.
Is that other lot, because it is involved in the construction of the road, was it included in the application? And did we have an owner's consent affidavit for that other property?
I did not include it
Okay.
because we have the right of way open. And I could certainly have the applicant approach them.
Well, well, I think they have to be part of the application because the road's being built on the property. So somehow I think we need to get
Yeah, we'll
their
approach them.
consent. And whatever the deeds, can you get us the deeds and the access easements if we don't have them?
Yes,
Yeah, so that actually can review that easement. So I would, I don't know that we're ready to deem this an unlisted action. We're just at sketch plan phase, and I think we need a little bit more information before we move forward. But from my perspective, if this is a subdivision, if it's considered major and we're doing cluster, I would like to see, again, obviously the ridge line protection area being considered as part of the open space, and I think that's very achievable here.
yes, even the current layout that we have, we don't infringe upon it. So
Right. So it's almost as if you included the entire property, you could use that as your open space, because it is the entire property, when you're subdividing it.
Well, the ridge line cuts through the middle. It's not the whole. At least the
Right,
boundaries.
correct.
What I would propose is from the ridge line all the way back would be,
This would be conservation area?
yeah,
Okay,
and essentially I think that gets us greater than 50%.
yeah, perfect. Okay. So then all this area here would be in conservation easement.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So you'll give us some updated plans,
Yes.
and then we'll move forward when we see those, see if we're ready with commencing secret. Okay.
No problem.
Anything else?
That's it.
Anything else, board members, consultants? No? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, Planning Board members, Council, Madam Secretary, and interested neighbors. My name is Jim Russ. I'm the attorney for Sunbrook Partners. With me is Bill Schneider, the principal of TS&S Engineering. And thank you for giving us this initial opportunity to make a presentation. We're asking the town board to approve the Conservation Cluster Voting Residential Zone for a 244 acre parcel that we're calling the Rhine Hill Preserve. We started that process in March, and on June 6th, the town board made the initial limited finding that it was a viable project, but referred it to the planning board for a more detailed examination. And I see the chair has put up what looks like a map of our property. And what we have is approximately 154 acres that will remain conservation easement land. We're going to impose deed restrictions if the zoning is approved and donate it to some appropriate 501c3 organization. And that's all it looks like in the bottom part of that drawing that's up there. There is a portion of that area, you can see that in the, like 1, 2, 3, 4 little boxes there, not that area, but there's a portion within the conservation zone that the town has requested be set aside for an active recreation area to be developed by the town. And that's the area, thank you, Madam Chair. And we're proposing and showing 2 athletic fields, parking area for approximately 75 vehicles, which would have a pervious surface so that it wouldn't create stormwater runoff problems. And there's also an area for what we suggest is an amphitheater. And we base that on a couple of projects that were proposed by and actually built during the Depression. They were outside the 1930s Depression. Outside grass and stone areas. The rest of that conservation area will be limited to hiking trails, maybe some bike trails. We'd also like to connect that area by a path for hiking and bikes over to the residential development so that people that might live there would have the opportunity to go there after, a sporting event or a musical event or whatever. The entire area would be open to the town residents. It would be public open space. There's another area that is formerly known as Shea property, and it will be the location, we hope, of 191 townhouses. And the idea behind this zoning is that rather than developing and building over the entire property, that you cluster the residential project in an area so that you have a large area that you can return to the public as open space. That is the proposed layout that we have right now. This is not a formal site plan or a site plan application to the planning board. It's merely part of a zoning request. So we view this as somewhat of an interactive process where we get some information to you, you comment on it, and we try to accommodate both you and the residents in developing something that makes sense. And within a 60-day period, under the zoning, you're then supposed to comment back to the town board. Do you think this works? Do you think it has a problem? Are there certain issues you need to address? The other area, which is the 2 large white-looking objects there, those are apartment buildings. One of them on the left, the smaller one, would have 100 apartments in it. The one to the right that's larger would have 200 apartments in it. It would be a blend of 100 single 1-bedroom units and 100 2-bedroom units. We're also proposing to provide affordable housing as part of this proposal. So 20% of the project will be set aside for affordable workforce housing, which is defined as housing that's income restricted, but income restricted to less than 100% of the AMI, area median income. It's not low income housing, it's workforce housing. Excuse me.
And that's actually a requirement of the zoning, the CCR. So it's provided because it's required.
Absolutely. Everything we're doing, we're trying to do something that's required. And just by way of background, because I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the people here at earlier meetings, we became aware of this property when the town itself posted online a request for developers to look at it and see if they could go forward with it. That's where we're trying to match this to what was on actually approved an environmental impact statement based on that draft before, and we're trying to comply with that. And that envisioned 491 units, but basically the townhouses were where the apartment buildings are, and the apartment buildings are where the townhouses were. So that's the major change we made. We did receive a 4-page referral. I don't know if anybody here has had a chance to look at all this because it's new material to you. And a number of the items that are on here, not all of them, but a number of them we've already addressed. As I said, we started this in March, and we gave three proposals to the town board. And in May, middle of May, the town planner sent a 27-paragraph comment to the town board. We responded to that on June 1st, and a number of the items that are on this list of things that you should consider, I believe we've already done and put in our June 1st plan. So I don't know how confusing it is with whatever's on file with you, but if you look for the plans dated June 1st, I think we see a number of those there.
Are these the June 1st? Because this is what I had received recently, I believe yesterday. So these are the June 1st plans?
I believe they were.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And I could kind of highlight some of them. I don't know how much detail you want to get into here. But they, for example, say a phasing plan has to be revised to show construction commencement for August of 2025. We did that. And this is the one issue. It says applicant needs to modify the project to meet the 40-foot height requirement for supplemental secret review. Both the environmental impact statement that was previously approved by the town and the zoning for this particular type of project allowed a 40-foot height. We had proposed that the 2 apartment buildings be taller than that, and that was the result of basically 2 facts. We wanted to try to reduce the amount of outdoor parking. We wanted to put parking underneath the apartment buildings. In order to do that, we needed to elevate the buildings. And we also wanted to restrict the ability of people to have to walk, especially if we have some older residents. We wanted to have it more convenient for them. And if you look at that one drawing, which is a conceptual drawing by the architect, one of the criticisms the town had originally is that it was too bland looking, the drawing put in. It needed more architectural features, so we put a pitched roof rather than a flat roof. I don't know what we're going to work out, if anything, with the planning board, but if possible, we're going to try to reduce the height of that building to the 40-foot level. And that might mean taking away the pitched roof and redesigning some of the interior structures and maybe the parking. But that we're open to considering that. Another item here says provision of updated response from the New York Natural Heritage Program and assessment of impacts on species other than a northern long-eared bat. That species was considered as part of your environmental impact statement, I believe, originally. We've contacted, first we went to the website. We don't see any other species there. We've contacted them. We want to get in writing. If there is one, we'll address it. And there's other things. There's MAC note, no tree cutting from April through October. I believe we have that in the June 1. But there's also a couple of other items here. One in particular, finalization of the trip generation assessment report by the end of July. We retained Creighton Manning as a traffic engineer. And actually on Monday, late Monday afternoon, they gave us a final draft traffic impact study. We haven't finalized our review of that yet, but I hope to be able to get that to the planning board next week. So you'll have that. Questions?
You know, we're really just receiving this the last couple days, and we did want to accommodate you so that we could get a brief overview of where you are in the process since the time that you were at that joint meeting.
Yes.
So have there been any revisions made since the joint meeting?
There were a number of revisions made when, I remember you were at the joint meeting, I don't remember, you may have been there as well, but I'm not sure. Yes, I think so, but the June 1st one is the one you should look at, and I think we made a number of changes from then until now. And I don't know if you have our response to the 27 issues of concern of the town planner, and I'll check with the secretary to make sure she has that. And if not, we'll put that up and give it to the public as well.
So, just real quick, from my perspective, I was looking at the plan that was in the EIS and the FEIS, which I have on the screen, and this is what was anticipated. So where the apartment building is now, it was expected that there would be 124 townhomes. And then along Rye Hill Road, it was a combination of townhomes, apartments, and then senior housing. And so, you know, I think that the scale of buildings is very different, the way that it's being laid out. And, you know, I'm reserving judgment because I haven't done the comparison, but what actually is better from a community character perspective, whether more townhouses or whether this mix is similar to the mix that you're proposing, I think we need to evaluate that and then determine what seeker studies need to be advanced to be able to understand the differences from what was actually examined. I think the other thing that just, this is a question for you and for the town. I'm not sure, because I know the FEIS examined 491 units, but there's some other documents that actually indicate that it's 475 units that are allowed. So I think that just needs to be resolved as to where everyone landed with the maximum. When you touched upon habitat and species, I would just say that, you know, when we do these analyses, and I don't know what happened with the EIS level, it's not just about looking at specific studies that come back from Natural Heritage Program. It's really about getting out to the site and taking a look at the overall site to make sure there's nothing else there. Because Natural Heritage Program letters that come back indicate these are potentially in the project vicinity, however, this does not obviate the need for actual surveys. So I don't know the extent to which any surveys were done in general of the site, and I'd like to know that. In terms of traffic, we just want to make sure that whatever you're evaluating is taking into consideration any of the other projects that are before the town. So, you know, we have Palatine Village in front of us, which is another project in close proximity, you know, to this development. So you just, again, need to make sure that whatever you're evaluating is considering the cumulative effect of traffic in the area. So those are just, again, instant reactions because we just received this information. And I'll ask, you know, the other board members whether they have any comments at this time, but this will be on our agenda for the next meeting. That will give all of us an opportunity to be able to look at the documents in detail and then come back with our reactions and recommendations. Ultimately, it's not our decision whether the zone lands here, it's the town board's decision, but it is referred to us for our thoughts and recommendations and critiques, which is what we would send back to the town board for their consideration. And then ultimately, if the zoning does land here, then we do the site plan and subdivision, et cetera. But we're really at the, you know, recommendation stage. Does this fit with the intent of the zone? Is it appropriate? Are the buildings appropriate? Is the layout appropriate? And whether there's additional analyses that have to be done as part of seeker, given what was done previously. So it's kind of my thoughts at the moment.
Thank you. I do Palatine Village.
Okay.
And we also tried to make sure we took data both pre and post-pandemic.
Yes.
Since there is such a concept.
Exactly.
And I recall 491. I do recall seeing the number 475 somewhere, but I don't know why I recall that. So
Yeah,
I'll refer to you to that, and we'll check that.
okay.
And we have not personally done any surveys with professionals on the site. They put me out there, I didn't get bit by anything unusual. So, but I'm not an expert in that type of.
No person, no person with you.
Yeah. I wasn't home. Council would like to be present. So.
Any comments?
Sure. One of the things that you touched on was 20% affordable housing. The CCR zone also requires 15% of the development be senior housing, although it does allow for that 15% to kind of overlay with that 20%. What I was curious is where in what you're proposing do you expect those, the affordable housing to be, the senior housing to be? How
We envisioned affordable to be in the apartments, and we don't limit the 55 and over to the apartments. So it may actually end up being a larger percentage. We're not necessarily defining it as a mathematical subset of the 20%.
Well, that's part of what I was wondering is, with the 2 apartment buildings being proposed, were you considering dedicating one of them as 55 and over or purely affordable? Or is it going to mix between the apartment buildings and perhaps the apartment buildings and the townhouse?
The affordable was envisioned to be in both of the apartment buildings. Okay. Treating everybody the same, not with a separate distinction of, based on income for admission, but if you're there, you're there. Okay. We, as I said, the seniors we could envision in either townhouses or apartments. And we're going to, try to, follow, obviously, Fair Housing Act, and all the requirements to verify income and continue to verify income and maintain it. I think it's required, by the code for 30 years, which is soldier's time. But, we'll just maintain it. It's fine.
Related to your comment, are you getting any tax financing credits from the state? Is there, and who's going to manage and ensure that if it's 30-year obligation, and so a tenant leaves, a new tenant comes in, who monitors and maintains that it remains affordable?
We have started the process of trying to identify state actors that would prove us to do it, and we envision having the state of New York being the party that would be monitoring it rather than the town. Nothing negative about the town doing it. We're more than willing to talk to it, but we think it would impose a cost on the town to have that kind of set up, and it would be better if the state is equipped and they have the experience to do it.
I guess my reaction to that is that when the state gets involved, they may have their own standards.
They do.
And so we would want, I think, as a town to know what those standards are, and to what extent do they then result in changes to the plan that we didn't anticipate because of those requirements. And I'm just talking hypothetically. I don't know what programs you're seeking, but I just would want to know entry. Do they have a particular maximum rental? Is that rental value going to meet the needs of people in Monroe? Because I think the workforce housing probably was intended for, not initially, but to focus on Monroe and then outward, people in the town.
It's a big question,
Yes.
and just trying to break it down into different parts. The area median income is the general standard, and 100% for a family of 4 in Orange County is, I think, $100,500. And in terms of other specific requirements that might be there, those are more issues that would come up if we get past the different stages in the building permit stage, because there's a lot of concern to make sure that there's access for people who may have disabilities, or that if we have apartments, they have grab bars, they need them with doors, no lifts.
Yeah, I'm actually getting into, so, you know, while that might be the median household income for 4, these are 1, 2, 3 bedroom units, so I think they're going to be accommodating, you know, for person families necessarily in those dwellings. And I specifically want to know whether the expectation then in accepting monies is, does it affect the ability to tax the development? Are these units, is the development in any way going to be not taxable from a real property perspective? And I also want to know whether the developer has considered any or talked to anybody about pilots, if those are being offered by any agencies and whether that's being contemplated, because again, that would have a fiscal impact to the community in terms of what the revenues would be from the project. And again, there's thinking of these because this is
We will try to
first look.
give you more information on that. You know, it would impact, I think the number is approximately 98 units, right? So, you know, you would still have 410, whatever my math is bad, 411, 311 units that would be subject to, you know, regular taxation. But you don't have that tax base now.
Okay.
Oh, no,
Please.
So, no, it's okay. That's a good one. When the CCR zoning law was put into place, this board also served an advisory role to the town board in considering that. As we worked through the process and as the law was put into place, an environmental impact statement was done and a test site was chosen for examining the law and how it would work in a real world situation. The sites that we're talking about here were those test sites. As part of the law, when it was enacted, if I remember correctly, as long as what ultimately got proposed on this site, if it fell within the limit of what had already been studied, then a new environmental impact study would not need to be completed. So my question for you, and it's a little broad, is how do we know that what you're proposing is within what was already studied and tested on this site? And I'm particularly curious in relation to, since the CCR law provided for 40-foot building heights, and as part of the petition, you're considering requesting that be changed to 53. If the test examined building heights at 40 feet, and now we're going to exceed that, does that trigger the possibility of another EIS? Are we outside of that? And are there any other areas of what you're proposing that either exceed possibly or smack up against the limits of what was tested?
I mean, I'm straight out, we were attracted to this particular property because the town had already completed an environmental impact statement, right? And you know, that reduces the amount of time, and as we've seen recently, you know, with changes in the economy and everything else, for me to know what's going to happen, you know, 2 years in the future, 3 years in the future, I don't know. So that was one attraction to us. We then said to the engineers, everybody else, design this to comply or meet with the existing environmental impact statement, right? The one area where it does not, and you know, we're being straight up about it, is the 53 feet rather than 40 feet, okay? And it's interesting because the referral that was made in the very beginning, it says, excuse me for 1 second, the town board determines the application for development is viable, except for the purposes of the referral and review by the planning board. The town board declines to consider the amended text amendment we proposed for the 40 feet, okay? Without prejudice to them doing it later. So that it doesn't refer that question to you in this paragraph, but in a later paragraph, it says that we need to modify the project to meet the 40-foot height requirement or complete supplemental secret, and they refer that to you. So, I mean, I took that as a straight on, Jeff, if you want to meet this town's approval and you want to get the community, you have to address this 40-foot issue. So our engineers and the architect are working to try to reduce the height to 40 feet. And I don't know if we can do it. If we can't, then we'll have to figure out some other adjustment. But the issue, the environmental impact study did look at the visual impact of a 40-foot structure and say that that was acceptable. So, the extra 13 feet may or may not be significant. I don't think it is, and I think there's a rationale for it. And if people think it is, we have to do an environmental study of that. We'll separate the projects basically and say, let's not figure out a way to reduce that height so that it's not an issue that is of concern to the community.
Sure.
So related to that, for me, it's, and we talked about this at the joint meeting, it's not just the height, it's the massing. Because the test case, which is what I had up, which was in the EIS, had townhouses there. And so, there are implications for the size of the building and the length of the building. If we look at the little boxes that are next to it, that's a relatively new subdivision of single-family dwellings. And that's their backyard, and depending on the terrain, it looks like it may be elevated above them. So it's not just about 40 feet, because 40 feet, may have been a single townhouse, let's say, box, and it may have been 100 feet long, or 120 feet long.
Right.
This is something very different from that. And so from my perspective, ultimately, even if you meet the 40-foot requirement, I think there need to be some additional visual evaluations of the effect of that scale of massing and the effect it has on the neighbors that are there.
Okay, I hear you.
Kind of a technical question, but, well, in relation to the areas that's going to be set aside for conservation, one of the things that the town spoke to you about was an area that was being dedicated to active recreation, and I know that was discussed when we had our joint meeting, and I started thinking about it then. So, I just want to understand how, in an area that's been set aside for conservation, you can also have this active recreation space as well. Not that what's being proposed necessarily is a good thing for the town, but how does that fit into what would be conservation easement land?
We were asked by the town to show where they could do that. Okay? So that's what we showed. We're not planning on, building or constructing anything over there, and, our plan was to comply with the requirement to dedicate it, as conservation open space.
So what you're saying is consent, you showed the concept of what the town wanted to consider.
Yes.
It's not actually part of the development plan per se, but it gives an idea of how some of this easement land could be used.
Yes, and if the town wants to do that, we'll have to figure out how to structure the deed restrictions. And it may cost us money by losing some tax deductions, and it may cost us money because there would be a need to do some grading to make sure it was large enough to have a flat surface, and to do some stormwater runoff design to make sure that wasn't a problem. That we're willing to accept that cost, but if the town says no, or you recommend to the town that they don't do that, fine.
With what's being shown, is there enough land being conserved that you can meet the 65% requirement that it be under easement, and that a portion of the space that would be for active recreation would be outside the conservation easement, so that it could be maybe more properly developed for those kinds of activities? Or are we right up against the 65?
We're up against the 65, but we started to do another calculation, and I can't see it from here on that map too well, but I saw a couple of comments and questions from some of the neighbors, and they said, oh, that large parcel you're donating, you couldn't do anything with it anyway, it's all wetland. It's not, okay? There's huge areas there, huge, areas that could be built on and developed. But in the limited area, the approximate 91 acres that we're building, you can see there's a lot of wetlands there and adjacent wetlands. So if you take that square footage and compare it to the area that the town wants to be active recreation area, you can balance them out, net it out, and get the total.
Well, that's part of what I was wondering, because you do have that wetland area between the two areas of development, in relation to that.
Again, piggybacking on Jack. So with regard to the conservation area, the zoning map shows that that's our ridgeline protection overlay zone. And so if that ball field would be constructed, it's actually being constructed on a ridgeline. And so I know that this is something that I guess the county's contemplating as opposed to what you're contemplating. But I think that needs to be considered, because if that's the only recreational site, it's kind of going against, or not that it's going against, but we need to see what the consistency is with what's otherwise allowed in the Ridge Protection Overlay District. Understanding that the town board can always, it's its property. And so I don't know that it has to follow the zoning, but there was an intent there, essentially. Related to conservation areas, recreation areas, is there a fee in lieu being provided for each of the dwelling units in lieu of recreation if you're not building for recreation?
We had considered that.
Okay. So in general, the town, if you don't provide the recreation on site, meaning active recreation, there's a fee in lieu of recreation. So my question is the town board anticipating that you'd be paying a fee in lieu of recreation, which would ultimately be used to?
Okay, there were two things. We discussed, the value of giving land, donating land, okay, as something to be paid in lieu of the recreation fee, because the value of that land is substantially greater than your recreation fee, I believe.
And that's more than the 65% that's required? Or is that the 65% that's required as part of the CCR?
That is the 65% that's required. Also, in the areas where we are developing, we do have set aside active recreation space for the residents there, but that would be limited to the residents, not the town at large.
Right, and this is typically, we're talking about town recreation when we're talking about the fee in lieu, I believe. But I did want to bring that up. Trying to get back to your plan. So when you say that there are recreational facilities on the site that are active for the residents, can you describe what those are, and where those are?
I'll defer to Bill, but I think there are the two green areas on one right there, the arrow just went over.
Okay.
And then there's one next to the apartment building A, I think. That's out there.
They're just conceptual at this point. You can do various things there, and just leaving an open field for a frisbee throw, or you can do bocce courts, which are 13 by 90, I think is a bocce court. But there are things that you can do. But right now it's just conceptual to make sure that the space is there so that it can be developed. Who knows, maybe even fit in pickleball courts since they're so small. But I don't know about pickleball.
Are these green areas, those are spaces also in here?
Yes.
Okay, so what is the size of that in general? I don't have a sense of scale.
Yeah. I'll have to get it because that's something we can get for John.
Okay, because this looks like it's just like a little park. Unless, I don't know if you could if you put a swimming pool in, but again, you're talking about for the residents. Okay. And is that part of the 65%? I think I'd like to understand what is included in the 65%.
On that drawing, the 65% is color coded as that green area to the, we've now contracted off the screen.
Is it this hatched area around it, or is it this green area in here? Actually, that looks like buffers from the wetlands.
Yeah, that's the wetlands and the wetland buffers. And in our calculation, we made mathematically simple. If you just continue down to that entire green area, without considering the wetlands in the area we can develop, that totals approximately 154 acres. So, the spaces within the 91 acres that you just highlighted in green, we didn't count those. We're actually more. If you count them in, I don't know the percentage, but we'd be more than 65.
Okay, so if we look at the entire development area these areas over here you did not include as part of the 65%. Your 65 is on these other parcels.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Which these also are not being disturbed to some extent, but I don't know what can be included in your 65%.
You know, we weren't planning on disturbing them at all. We might put a trail or a walking or bike path somewhere if it's allowed, but otherwise we weren't going to touch those areas.
Okay.
And we can't build on them, so, yeah. I think they make it attractive, you know, having, you know, the stream, it's a beautiful spot.
Anybody else have comments, questions about the project, just preliminary again? We're looking at this kind of thing.
I do. So, I guess about 5 or 6 years ago, when the owners of this property bought the property, we were advertising in papers in Brooklyn about a big development that was going to take place on Rye Hill Road. I live on Rye Hill Road. As a matter of fact, that Shea Meadows property is formerly our property. So we're very protective of it. And, you know, I think my wife and my daughter-in-law, my daughter, are tuned into, I guess, the Facebook thing that's going on around here. Being a 71-year-old boomer, I'm not too up on the Facebook thing, but they've given me a lot of information which doesn't seem to be accurate. And I think, you know, for just the people that are out here in the audience, this is an emotional thing. You know, this is an emotional project because we all want, and I and my brothers, it all be farmland. And we keep it that way, like we've been able to do in the world to some extent. But we, so I went to the extent of spending $5,000 of my own money to hire a land use lawyer and to argue in front of the town board at that time to protect the Rye Hill Road corridor. And I still feel the same way about that. I'm prejudiced against overdevelopment, responsible development. And, you know, our current town board helped us dodge a bullet back a few years ago by installing a moratorium and hiring Bonnie Franson here who's one of the most experienced and knowledgeable land use persons in the state. And we're blessed to have her chairing this board, this planning board. I can tell you all that we all feel the same way up here as you, and that's what we're doing. We're representing you up here, right? We are an extension of you, and we want to do what is best and what is right. We are in between the kind of dodging bullets in a way. You know, we have developers over here. Some of them are very responsible, like I think, you know, our current developers are, and some of them aren't. So we're in between the people and the developers, and we're trying, and we have the law that's on both sides. And that's the constraint. We have to do not only what's right, but what's legal. So for, you know, kind of speaking to my wife and kids in a way, we're trying to do the best we can with what we have. We are really interested. I am very interested in, there's certain people in this room who supported me when I, you know, went in front of the board and tried to stop that project. And we were successful doing it only because the board created a moratorium. So they have our best interest at heart. And I'm glad that people are very interested in this project, one way or the other. We want to do what's right, and we want to get the public's input on this at the proper time, of course. But we want accurate information also to get out there. So it's blah, 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 blah.
You know,
If I could just jump in to clarify the different roles here, because there is, of course, the town board, that's the elected board. By the residents, this board's an appointed board, so you are here to follow the code, of course, and that's what really guides your review process. You're not here as a representative of any person or any specific people. You're here as you're appointed in your role as a planning board member to follow the code. So I just want to make sure that distinction is clear.
We understand that, absolutely. And I think that was Pat's, as much as, we understand everybody and we want to hear them, we also have laws that we have to live with them, so. Jeff, you have another comment?
One more question, one more comment, if I may. You talked a little bit about the potential passive uses in the conservation area. Along the southwest border, when you're coming to the top of Rye Hill, you're heading in the direction of Monroe Lake, part of which is town parkland. How close does the top of the property basically come to the Monroe town lands? Is there any opportunity for interconnectivity there, or are there privately owned lands in between?
I don't know the answer. I know where Monroe Lake is. I didn't know that until recently, but I don't know where it is. But I know it's close. I think there's some land in between us and that town property.
Okay.
Because I thought, when we were talking about trails, I thought it might be interesting to connect the two, but I don't know if they can, but we'll consider it. And maybe I shouldn't go there. I appreciate what council said, but, Sherry, I want to say to you, I appreciate your from the heart honesty and, where you stand with your neighbors. I mean, I didn't grow up in this area. I grew up in a different state and in the city, but I watched the entire area around it, which was beautiful farmland, being developed. And I always thought that it was horrible. I mean, a lot of it turned out to be factories and, commercial things, but there were large subdivisions. And, I didn't like it, but somebody's going to develop that property. We're trying to do it in a responsible way in accordance with what we think the town and the planning board had previously looked at. Agriculture would be great, but there's only one crop that I could think of at the moment that might actually be profitable to grow in the area. But there's probably people busy ahead of us on that scale, so I don't know if you want that, but we're not in that business, so.
My comment is, so yes, Pat's lived his whole life on the Rye Hill corridor. I grew up there, still have family in that area, and I'm a 50-year resident of the town. Steve lives, across Rye Hill from that area as well. So we're intimate with this area on a lot of levels, which I think is a benefit. At this stage of the game, we serve an advisory role to the town board in their consideration of the petition, and that's merely our function. And again, as representatives of the town and its citizens. We just got these materials to examine truthfully right before this meeting. And we are on a somewhat limited time to provide the advice and guidance to the town board that we can. I would ask that any further submissions that you have or enhancements or further information be provided as quickly as possible and with enough time before meetings so that we can really examine them and do a good job for you and do a good job for the town.
Yeah, I will try to honor that as much as we can, because I want you to have the appropriate time to review things and, so that the community can feel that, it was given a hard look, and we're going to try to respond to it. And we'd like to do that as openly as possible. I don't know how you actually work in terms of, this to me appears to be like an interactive process. So, I want to have open, interactive communications with town officials. So.
Anyone else?
I want to have a quick question, I'm sorry. You had mentioned earlier about the 20% of affordable workforce housing and 15% by law for senior housing 55 and older. Are these units, the approximately 300 apartments and 191 or so, give or whatever it is, of the townhomes, are these intended for private purchase or for rentals?
Right now, our plan is to have the apartment buildings be rentals and the townhouses be for sale. And I preface that by saying right now, just because in the last 3 months, the interest rates have gone up tremendously on home mortgages. They're going to go up more for the end of the year. The cost of materials are going up. The ability to get materials is going up. We still see this as a viable project, but we may have to, rent things before we could sell. But whatever the market will bear at that time, when we get, hopefully before August of 2025, when we start construction, we may have to figure out, do we need to adjust something? But if we could do affordable condominiums or co-ops, I would be in favor of that. I think giving people a stake and an ownership in something, making it their home, I think is better than just having them be tenants. It's a personal bias.
So again, just to clarify, it's your intent at this time for the townhomes to be private purchase and
Yes.
the apartments to be fully rental?
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody else? Consultants?
Just one topic that I don't mean to drill down on technical topics tonight, but I do know that water is of a concern for this project, and it is adjacent to an existing town water district. So I just request that maybe we get a meeting together, with your engineer and maybe the water department for the town to discuss that topic.
Yes, we would love to do that. You'll see when you get into the materials and zoning for the conservation cluster zone says that to the extent possible, we're supposed to use the municipal water system and sewer system. And I know there's a water main that goes across the property, but there's one portion of the property that's not in, it has to be petitioned, I think under Article 12 of the code. I got it right for the High Ridge Water District to be connected there.
Water district.
Oh, thank you.
I think it'd be useful on the maps to clearly show what's emergency access versus full access. To discuss what roads, if they're going to be private versus if there's any proposal to dedicate roads. The highway department will indicate it or not. You may have this in your information, as I'm looking at this, because I see connections to some of the, again, neighboring subdivision, and I think it'd be useful for the residents to know, again, whether this is really emergency or if this is full access.
Connection to Prospect Plan, that would be an emergency access.
Okay.
Strictly to comply with the fire.
Okay, and this may have been addressed at the town board.
We delineated between emergency access and public access, if you will. And we also indicated that the roads would be in accordance with state and town law. I think it's Article 63. Because I think they have to be.
We could talk to our attorney about that. We'll talk to our attorney about that.
Okay.
I think by virtue of, we'll talk about it. Trying to think if there's anything else. So we will, okay.
Did we go over traffic analysis on the last time we met with you guys?
No, they're drafting.
We did not give you the traffic study. I just received a draft. It looks very complete to me, but I want to make sure that it is. And when we finish reviewing that, it'll be next week, and we're going to file it with the board secretary.
This is also drilling down a bit, but I would like to know where the limits of disturbance are, the boundaries of the limits of disturbance, to understand if you are in these development areas, are you grading it out, or are there pockets of, because it is woodland in places, whether that's being retained, and especially by the apartment buildings, if they're going to be retaining walls, and hot size and height and length of
There
retaining
will
walls.
be walls, we'll try to get some more details on that.
Because I think we might want to see some cross sections of what that looks like. So, anything else? No? So I think with that, let's just, again, thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having us.
And letting us know status. And we'd like to recommendations that could go to the town board for their consideration. And then if we have any need for information, we'll make sure to contact you through our, through Norton consultants.
So what I was gonna say is I'll check to get the exact date. We'll make sure we get you the traffic study next week. And if in your preliminary review, you think there are some other materials that you'd like to see, that your council or the secretary could contact me, and, I'll try to get it to you. I don't know what the date is for the meeting, but like a week in advance or something.
Well, submission date is actually the 30th of June, next Thursday by noon, to be on the July meeting.
Okay. All right, so the traffic study will have to be before that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We do appreciate the public coming out. This isn't a public hearing, but I think it's beneficial for you to hear our comments and questions. And we will continue to have them, and you're welcome to attend the next meeting as well. Thank you.
When is the public?
Public hearings. If there is one, if the town board may decide not to contemplate it, that would be the town board.
The landing of the 60-yard zone is the purview of the town board. At this stage, we just advise people, if they do land the zone, and at some point it will come back to us for site plan approval. That will still happen. That doesn't go away, just, that's our, but before that can happen, the town board has to decide, will they land in the 60-yard zone, or will they not?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the report. Thank you.
Do we have the minutes? I think some of them.
Oh, I can listen to it.
Don't wait a minute for everybody to.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Yes. You stay for a minute,
Take
stay
care.
fall asleep listening to our minutes.
Hi, Jeff. Bicycle, used to bicycle right
Yeah.
by the house on Ocean Avenue.
Yes.
So, do we have the June minutes?
Here's your June minutes, wrong in June.
Or did I give you the, let's do it.
Our June minutes. This is the first meeting for June.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at January. Sorry,
No, I didn't do those already today.
All right, so before we do these minutes,
Well, most of them, there is no quorum for.
well, that's what I was gonna say, so.
I started marking no quorum on the agenda,
So for the next agenda, let's make sure that whatever we didn't have quorum for, I think Ashley just said, we don't approve them.
Yeah,
Because we didn't have
some of
quorum.
them
Just
don't
say
have
that,
quorum
correct.
anymore.
Okay.
So you just, they are what they are, they're just not approved.
Okay, and so we'll do that. Before we adjourn, any comments, from Ashley, from Sean, any of the board members, anything you want to add? Thank you very much for the kind words.
Well deserved.
Thank you. And anybody, anything to add? Okay. So with that, board, do you have anything you want to add as far as?
I do. He's one of my cohorts from the Conservation Commission.
Hello.
Dennis Fodor.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
He's impressed by your operation so far.
Thank you. All right, so if there's no other comments, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. May I have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Okay. With
This is
that,
great.